got that kind of book cover, book layout. And you would typically take this kind of document out to EPUB, even though there are some issues, but I'll get to those in a minute. But let's start with the cover. InDesign CS5 and InDesign CS4 could export out EPUB documents. So the first thing we did in CS5.5 was we updated the standard so that now, when you make an EPUB document, there it is, you get the option for the first time in InDesign to make a cover. So you can either do it the old way, which is no cover, or it will automatically take whatever your first page is and rasterize it into a cover. Or you can use my favorite option, which is you go design a great looking cover in Photoshop or Illustrator, and then choose that file. And that's the cover it will use for your EPUB when it exports. Because that way you can design a cover that looks good on a small screen or small device. So that's one of the first things we took care of. Second thing, and this is probably the bigger problem, is what about layout? This is multiple columns. We know multiple columns don't work well in an ebook unless you're going to do a lot of CSS positioning and programming. So even something as simple as the table of contents on the left and images on the right. When that goes out to EPUB, things are going to be in line, but in some random order that you had no control over. So how do we fix that? In the new articles panel, I can now, for the first time, drag content from the page and create a new article. It's called out in TOC. Once I drag that new article in, I can also even use it as a way of turning things off that I don't want to go out from my EPUB export. So maybe your example is you don't want the images to go out for EPUB. So you just drag those in and turn them off. So they're in the print layout, but they're not in the EPUB layout. But in my case, I do want them. So I'll click OK. Then if I want this to go next, I select it and drag it in as the next item to go out. I just keep building my articles panel to list the items in the order that I want them to go out in that single column view for EPUB. But I've got a better way. I got an additional way. A better way in this example. And that means that I have something else I want. I want this map to go underneath Old Town. I want the green light district to go underneath green light. The problem is, in the articles panel, these are individual objects. So if I don't break up the table of contents into two pieces, I can't put them in order the way I want. So without breaking it up, here's what I'm going to do. Let's zoom in a little bit. Let's select the Old Town map and the Old Town text and group them together. Now that I've got them grouped together, you notice in InDesign we have the yellow box around the corner. On the top right now, we've got this little blue box in CS5.5. This little blue box allows me to now drag it where I want to anchor that object. And if I show my text thread, you'll actually be able to see the anchor. So that object is now anchored underneath that text. And that's where it will go for my EPUB export. I would do the exact same thing for the next map. You get the idea. Next, what about two objects that are side by side like that? Well, the text is flowing into two columns. That will just automatically revert back to one column, no big deal. But what about these two graphics side by side? Group them together. You group them together, it's going to treat them as one graphic side that looks side by side, but they're really one graphic as far as EPUB is concerned. Now let's go to the end-all, be-all, worst possible thing that used to happen with EPUB. You have this nice, giant graphic that looks great on your printed document. But when you exported that out to EPUB before, you get this little tiny graphic on the page. It was at least half the size. Because EPUB is a format that has to work on something as small as a phone and all the way up to your largest computer display and everything in between. So if it had to work on something as small as a phone, that means that the image has to be as small as what will work on a phone. And it did not do any dynamic sizing. So it just went to the lowest common denominator, the phone, and that was it. Now, in the export dialog box, as well as in InDesign, I can do object export options, and I can say for EPUB and HTML export, let's create a custom rasterization. One that will automatically make the image size relative to the page width. It will dynamically size my image based on the screen it's watching. And we have high-resolution displays. The iPhone 4, for example, has a Retina display. Many of the Android devices have higher resolution displays now. So I can go ahead and bump up the resolution. I no longer have to deal with a low-res image for everything. So I would, of course, do that on all my images on export as opposed to one by one. Last but not least, let's go to page 7. And on page 7, I want the number one most requested things in CS5 for EPUBs. As you know, CS5 came out last year in April. And at the same time, there was another device that came out around that same time, if you remember. The iPad. Now, I was waiting with Betagraph to see what ebook format they were going to use, and yes, they use EPUBs. Great. Awesome. So you were already there. I knew we could export EPUBs. But then later in the year, they updated their app, their iBooks app, to not only support EPUB, but to support video inside the EPUBs. And at the time, they were doing something that no one else was doing because they were breaking the spec. The spec did not allow for H.264 video in an EPUB. So that's why we didn't do it yet. Well, EPUB 3.0 now allows us. So, of course, I can now go to MiniBridge. I can now go to my movies folder. I can now just grab an H.264 MP4, drag it right into InDesign, drag it out as large as I want it to play. Wait for it, wait for it, wait for it. And there it is. And now that my video is here, I can go ahead and do a couple things. First of all, I go to my interactive layout here, and I go to my media panel, and in my media panel, I can actually play the video.
Why was I sent to this place?
To learn more about InDesign. Okay, so now I can sit here to learn more about InDesign, and what we want to do is we can scrub through the entire movie, we can find a good spot and make that the actual image that will be displayed. Now that we have that image, and I would suggest creating a custom image that has the word play on it or something like that, to get the idea. I want to now anchor that image in place. And of course, I want to put the image on the page, which is the video, and I'll say text wrap, drag it where I want it to go, the text will automatically wrap around it, and now when I export that out for EPUB, any device that can play an MP4 video with the latest standards will be able to play that, including the iPad. Would you like to see it?
Stay away from the clip.
Yes or no?
Yeah.
Okay, if I can have you switch to the iPad, please. Number 7. And now that we're on the iPad, there's the iBooks app. I'll go and tap it. Here's my iBooks bookshelf. And there is the upper left-hand corner, the CS5 version of a book with no cover. And of course, the one next to it is the neighborhood guide, the one we've just been looking at. We'll bring up the neighborhood guide. There's the cover. We can flip between the pages. There's my map in line with the text as I described. Okay, cool. We keep going. There's our image that looks good, tall, and still resizes down nice and good, small. Great. And if we go back a couple pages to the film festival, go over to the video, play the video, and the video can play in line, or more importantly, full screen. Gorgeous video playing right inside your iBook app directly from Premiere Pro into InDesign. Cool?
Very cool.
No? You don't like it?
Yes.
Okay, next.